What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing you a card discussion on Typhoon. Now, this is a card that starts to see play every once in a while depending on how a format starts to shape up. We first got it as a TCG exclusive out of a battle pack, and interestingly enough, even though this card may not be good as some cards we're going to compare it to in this video, the strengths that this card does have warrants its playability depending on the given format. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest patrons as always. So big shout outs today to Jamie as well as Joshua. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through Patreon, then check out the Patreon link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So Typhoon is a normal trap card with an effect that reads as follows. Target one face-up spell or trap card on the field. Destroy it. If your opponent controls 2 or more spell or trap cards, and you control no spell or trap cards, you can activate this card from your hand. So, immediately when you look at this card, you want to start gravitating and comparing it to other cards that are very similar to it. Cards like Mystical Space Typhoon, Cosmic Cyclone, hell, even Twin Twister, we can throw that in there as well. And when you start looking at those cards, they have a lot more benefits compared to a card like Typhoon. I mean, those cards are quick play spells compared to Typhoon being a trap card, meaning they have a lot more flexibility in when they can be activated and just how widely applicable they are in general. They also can destroy face up or face down cards, whereas Typhoon can only destroy face up cards, and that's a really big plus for a card like that where, you know, it's a lot more restricting in the fact that Typhoon can only hit face up cards. And then you also have the fact that Cosmic Cyclone can banish cards, which can be very relevant depending on the matchup. Twin Twister can hit multiple cards, so the fact that you have a card that can hit 1 for 2, even though you have to discard one, compared to just going 1 for 1, meaning you can hit multiple threats and clearing your opponent's back row for you to start making your plays. So when you're looking at these cards in comparison, why would you want to play a card like Typhoon? Well, the reason you want to play this card is in the last part of its text. The fact that if your opponent controls 2 or more spell and traps and you don't control any, you can activate this card from your hand, meaning you can use this card during your opponent's turn. And not only can you use it during your opponent's turn, you can use it when your opponent goes first if you lose the die roll, or if you're opting to go second in general. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, let's take a look at some of the best current decks of the format and how Typhoon can be effective. So starting off with Pendulum Magician. Inherently, any card that just has spell or trap removal is going to be good against Pendulum Magician because you're able to clear off pendulum scales, and they're also just going to be having a ton of cards on the field because they need to have 2 pendulum scales, which happen to be treated as spell cards, meaning Typhoon's activation requirement is going to be live a lot more likely than you might think. You can use Typhoon, for instance, to deny your opponent to recurse something off of Oath Dragon and also being able to destroy the low scale at the same time. You can use it to stop something like an Astrograph or a Chronograph to be able to blow themselves up to special summon either Star or Time Gazer to the field and deny them from being able to get to that heavy metal foe's Electromite. You can use it to preemptively pop a purple Poison Magician so that when it's your turn, you're not having to deal with the fact that your opponent can use that on you in a bunch of different instances. You can also use it when your opponent is attempting to pendulum summon, and sometimes if you get a good read on what's in their hand or you have enough knowledge to make an educated guess, you can pop the high or the low scale and make it so that they're not going to either be able to pendulum summon or they need to have the one card that is the scale that you popped in order to go on with their pendulum summon from there. You can also use it to maybe pop the card that they might be targeting with heavy metal foe's Electromite. That's a really strong move because not only are you denying them from getting the value off of that, but then they're not going to be able to add the Astrograph Sorcerer back to their hand and gain the value from special summoning and searching another card, basically just comboing off. That's a really, really strong field. Then you also have the ability to stop the Pendulum FDK by being able to just deny them from adding the instant fusion. Of course they can have it, but if they have it, we're not playing on the fact that they're going to. We're going to be able to stop them as best they can, and if they're going down that line of play, they most likely don't have the ability to go on with the Pendulum FDK as a whole. Lastly, you can also use this against Time Pendulum Graph if it's already face up on the field. Now again, we know if it's face down, that's a little bit more difficult to work with, but eventually they are going to flip it face up when attempting to disrupt your field. So then if you don't have any spell or trap cards, you can just drop Typhoon down and you're able to remove the Time Pendulum Graph and pretty much remove their only source of disruption or just one of their means of disruption during your turn. So we just discussed like 7 different ways that Typhoon is really strong against Pendulum Magician, and 6 of those ways out of the 7, pretty much everything exempt from using it against Time Pendulum Graph, are all things you can do if your opponent's going first, and that's where the value of Typhoon is. You're able to use this card to disrupt their play and help hinder their combo to make it so that they don't end on as strong of a board, so that when it's your turn, you're drawing into your 6th card, you'd be on 5 because you use Typhoon to disrupt them, you're gonna have a much easier time dealing with their board compared to if you didn't have that Typhoon in the first place. So the fact that this acts as a hand trap version of Mystical Space Typhoon is incredibly valuable in that light. Now another deck that Typhoon is very strong against, and is arguably the 2nd strongest deck of the current format, is True Drako. Now, True Drako, when you look at it, Dragonic Diagram is a card that they need to use to pop their True Drako spell and trap cards so that they can maximize their value off of True Drako Heritage to draw as many cards as possible. This means they need to send those cards from the field to the graveyard so Heritage has enough fuel to trigger. The thing is that requires them to have not only Dragonic Diagram on the field, but also a set card face down as well. They now control 2 spell or trap cards, which means that when they activate the diagram, you can drop Typhoon, pop the diagram, and not only are they not going to have the fuel for Heritage, they're not going to get the search off of diagram, meaning they're not going to be able to search their Maiden, their Masterpiece, or whatever combo piece that they're currently missing at that point in time. Ghost Ogre is a very popular option against the Drako matchup, and what I really like about Typhoon is it essentially acts as your 4th, 5th, and 6th copies of Ghost Ogre if you happen to be side decking this card for that matchup. And the interesting thing is, Ghost Ogre is only once per turn, whereas Typhoon isn't. And that's one of the big downsides of a card like Ghost Ogre, because if they have multiple diagrams, and considering the fact that it's still at 3, and with 3 copies of Terraforming, it's likely that they're going to be able to access multiples, especially when you factor in all the draw power that Draco's Demise decks have at their disposal. So the thing is, you have the ability to essentially have pseudo copies of Ghost Ogre to handle multiple copies of Diagram and deny their ability to search the combo pieces that they need to build an incredibly strong board. Now, it's not only good against Diagram because you can use Typhoon to hit any of the other True Drako spells and traps as well. You can hit Heritage, you can hit Disciples, Apocalypse, Return, assuming the trap cards are face up, of course. But what's really valuable about this is that you're able to hit these cards during your opponent's turn, which means if you're able to do so, not only are you denying them from using a Tribute Summon, but you're preventing them from gaining the extra value of those spell and trap cards hitting the graveyard and blowing up and disrupting cards on your field. Think about if your opponent activates Heritage in an attempt to tribute something like Majesty Maiden and you blow it up with Typhoon. Not only are they not going to get the draws off of Heritage, you've denied their ability to special summon Maiden, and that means that if they were to summon Maiden, you've also denied the +1 that Maiden's going to give them, because you're going to activate a card on your turn and trigger the Maiden, which means they won't be able to search Masterpiece, which means they can't summon the Masterpiece during your turn and further disrupt your plays as well. So just by having that one Typhoon, look at how much value you are able to get out of it in terms of what the True Drako player would be able to do had you not had that card. And that to me really screams the value that a card like Typhoon can aid in any single deck. Now, another deck that's a little bit under the radar, I would say, is Zefra, but I think a lot of people aren't giving this deck enough credit. This deck did win the UDS Sacramento here in the US, and that's one of the most competitive events, even though the attendance numbers aren't high. The average skill of the player at that event is much higher than normal, since you do have to qualify for it, and Zefra ended up winning the event. And Typhoon is a very nice option against Zefra as well, because you can not only hit cards like Oracle of Zefra, but you can also hit cards like Zefra Zephyrath, and hitting Zephyrath is one of the biggest crippling blows to a deck like Zephyra, because by hitting Zephyrath, they're not going to be able to add a card to their extra deck, modulate the scale of the Zephyrath, but more importantly, they're not going to be able to get that resource in the extra deck, which is going to fuel a lot of their plays. And assuming they don't have a card like Zephyr Providence, you're going to be able to go off without a hitch, and that can be a crippling blow to any Zephyra player. Last but not least, I did want to discuss how this card is very effective against Floodgates as well. Now, one of the biggest Floodgates of the current format is Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, a lot of you guys are thinking, well, if I open the Mystical Space Typhoon, or I open the Cosmic Cyclone, or if I open the Twin Twister, I'm going to be fine, because they'll flip Anti-Spell, I will chain that card to Anti-Spell, destroy it, and now I won't have to worry about it. But let's say you don't open the Anti-Spell on your next turn. Then that means you're not going to be able to do anything, and you'll pass turn back to your opponent. Now let's say your second turn comes around, you draw for turn, and look, it's Mystical Space Typhoon, it's Cosmic Cyclone, it's Twin Twister. You're in a really bad spot, because now that Anti-Spell is active, you have to set that card for a whole turn before you're able to do anything with it, and that means you have to wait till your third turn, and that's assuming your opponent doesn't destroy it, meaning that you're not going to have any way to get rid of the Anti-Spell Fragrance, and you're probably going to lose that game as a whole. However, let's say for your second turn you drew Typhoon. You are now able to use Typhoon because it isn't a spell card, destroy your opponent's Anti-Spell Fragrance, and you're able to proceed with your plays from there. So obviously you have a 40-something% chance, like 43%, to open one of your three Cosmic Cyclones, Twin Twisters, Mystical Space Typhoons, but that doesn't guarantee you're always going to open it. So Typhoon is slightly better in that aspect, because if you happen to draw it on your second turn, it's much better than drawing something like Mystical Space Typhoon, Cosmic Cyclone, or Twin Twister, where you'd have to wait a whole nother turn, and you'd probably lose the game by that point. Another good point is the fact that with True Drako on the rise, Magic Deflector might see a little bit of resurgence in the side deck, so a lot of players, if they play Anti-Spell Fragrance, if you have something like Space Typhoon or Cyclone for the Anti-Spell Fragrance, they're going to have Magic Deflector to chain in response to that, which means the Anti-Spell is going to live since it negates quick play spell cards. Well, Typhoon isn't a spell card, so it's another way to kind of next level one-up your opponent to kind of play ahead of what they might be playing ahead of, destroy the Anti-Spell Fragrance, and pretty much go in from there. You can also use it against Unending Nightmare, Rivalry of Warlords, all these other floodgates that are currently seeing play, but those can all be stopped by the traditional quick play spell and trap removal as well. I just thought it was worth mentioning at the end of the video. So guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about Typhoon as a whole. I think it's a neat little card. You're obviously not going to be main decking this, but it's definitely an interesting choice for the side deck if you want to have some more interaction during your opponent's turn up against your Pendulum Magician matchup, your True Drako matchup, your Zephyr matchup, and maybe some other niche matchups as well. But I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time. 2, 3, 4.